Union Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia today said that ministry is hopeful that Go First will resume flights very soon. Scindia said that Go First has submitted a plan to DGCA and some queries were asked, some queries were answered, and they will be reverting on those queries very soon. Speaking on the work done in the aviation sector in the last 9 years of the Modi government, the minister also said that Go First suspension led to a void of over 300 flights and 4 to 5 cities were particularly affected by high airfares. The ministry has taken cognizance of the issues related to airfare which have surged on certain routes in the recent week, and it has asked airlines to rationalize fares and watch the pricing. Now, airfares have jumped significantly, as I mentioned, on certain route in the wake of the crisis hit Go First suspending operations on 3rd of May. Let's quickly listen into the minister speaking there at a press conference before we start discussing the larger question on what happens with civil aviation and the prices of flying on air or taking to air in case this high pricing continues.
विश्व में एक नया इतिहास रचने वाला एयर इंडिया 470 प्लेन्स का ऑर्डर $70 बिलियन का मात्र शुरुआत है और पिछले अनुमान लगा रहे हैं अनेक एजेंसी के अगले 4-5 वर्षों में 1200 से 1400 अतिरिक्त प्लेन्स की ऑर्डर भारतीय कंपनियों के द्वारा रखी जाएंगी। अगर अधोसंरचना की हम बात करें तो जहां 74 एयरपोर्ट होते थे आजादी के 68 वर्षों में, वहीं इन 9 वर्षों में 74 अतिरिक्त एयरपोर्ट, हेलीपोर्ट और वाटरड्रोम स्थापित करके 148 पर आज हम पहुंच चुके हैं। तो 100% वृद्धि हुई है 9 वर्षों में। जो 68 वर्षों में भारत ने किया है वही भारत ने 9 वर्ष में दोबारा करके दिखाया है। अगर इसका एक भाग हम लें ग्रीनफील्ड एयरपोर्ट्स का, 2013-14 में केवल 3 हमारे ग्रीनफील्ड एयरपोर्ट्स थे, आज 14 हो चुकी हैं। तो 11 नए ग्रीनफील्ड एयरपोर्ट बने हैं। जो हमने 21 की अनुमति प्रदान की है उसमें से 11 तैयार होकर देश के लिए समर्पित हो गए। तो 400% वृद्धि इस क्षेत्र में हुई। अगर उत्तर पूर्वी राज्यों की हम बात करें जहां 9 एयरपोर्ट्स थे 68 वर्षों में, आज उसी उत्तर पूर्वी राज्य में 17 एयरपोर्ट्स हैं। मतलब करीब 8 अतिरिक्त बने हैं। 90% की वृद्धि उस क्षेत्र में हुई। अब आपके साथ मैं इस मंत्रालय के सफर पे थोड़ा चलना चाहूंगा और आप इस पर प्रकाश डालना चाहूंगा। 4 मुख्य भागों में हमने अपने सफर की तैनाती की है। पहला है हमारा कोर एरिया, कोर ऑपरेशंस, एयरक्राफ्ट, एयरपोर्ट्स। सेकंड है हमारा इकोसिस्टम, क्योंकि जब कोई इंडस्ट्री एक स्केल धारण कर लेती है उसके बाद इकोसिस्टम की स्थापना हो पाती है, और वही इकोसिस्टम की स्थापना अब नागर विमानन के क्षेत्र में भारत में बनना शुरू हो चुका है। तीसरा है संस्थात्मक ढांचा, इंस्टीट्यूशनल स्ट्रेंथनिंग, क्योंकि अगर विमानन क्षेत्र में एयरलाइंस और एयरपोर्ट्स की वृद्धि हो रही है, इकोसिस्टम का सप्लांटेशन हो रहा है, तो इंस्टीट्यूशनल सिस्टम में भी वृद्धि लानी होगी उस अतिरिक्त ट्रैफिक को संभालने के लिए, उस अतिरिक्त डिमांड को संभालने के लिए। और चौथा भाग है नए इनिशिएटिव्स, मतलब अभी कहाँ हमें बीज बोने हैं भविष्य के वृक्ष वृक्ष को तैनात करने के लिए। तो इन 4 भागों में हमने अपने मंत्रालय के सफर को हम लोग ने मॉनिटर किया है। अगर कोर एरिया की हम बात करें तो कोर एरिया के अंतर्गत पैसेंजर वृद्धि की तो हमने बात की है। वर्तमान में हम लोग 14.5 करोड़ पर आ चुके हैं, जहां 130% की वृद्धि हुई है। पर हमारा अनुमान है कि 2030 तक ये आंकड़ा 45 करोड़ तक जाएगा। अभी 300% वृद्धि आने वाले 7 सालों में होने वाली है। और वैसे ही एयरपोर्ट्स के क्षेत्र में, जहां मैंने आपको कहा कि जो 68 साल में देश ने करके दिखाया है, वही प्रधानमंत्री जी के नेतृत्व में 7 सालों में देश ने करके दिखाया है, 9 सालों में डबलिंग हुआ है।
All right, that's Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia there, laying out a roadmap for civil aviation sector and also talking about the highlights of 9 years of Modi government and what the government achieved as far as building airports is concerned, from airport infrastructure to greenfield to flights. All in all, trying to build momentum around the last 9 years and to discuss what the momentum is at the moment, the highs, the lows, the misses. With me in the studio is my colleague Krishnakumar. Also joining us is Dhiraj Mathur, who is an aviation expert. I want to come to you first, Dhiraj. Before we go into nitty-gritties of how the last 9 years have been, at the moment, one of the major concerns that is sort of a concern not just with the aviation regulator, with also the ministry, but people in general, and that is the high prices of airfares. And that is largely due to the fact that Go First suspended flights on 3rd of May. Since then, there's been a void. And from what comes across right now, from what we look at when we try and book a flight, all the existing aviation players, they are trying to milk the opportunity, and the airfares on some very, very common routes is also at an all-time high.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. On the airfare, there are two things I'd like to say. In general, there was a major surge after the train accident and after the problems in Manipur first started. That kind of extraordinarily high pricing was actually, if you ask me, immoral. The airline should not have done it. There should have been a humanitarian touch perspective, and they should have been helping passengers and our citizens of this country. That is unforgivable. If you ask me, that was a very immoral thing that happened. Other than that, as far as the high airfares are concerned, look, you must realize it's not just Go First 60 aircraft. Overall, 108 aircraft out of total 700 that operate in India, 108 out of 700 are grounded. And that includes all airlines, because almost everyone has Pratt & Whitney engines, and everyone who has Pratt & Whitney engines has a problem. Over and above that, there have generally been supply chain disruptions during the COVID period, and globally, the industry hasn't fully recovered as far as spares and particularly spares are concerned. So as a consequence, there are 108 aircraft that are grounded, and there is an acute shortage of seats. This was particularly acute in May, which is a busy month. June is relatively lighter, and therefore, if you see, the prices have also fallen. The second thing is that if you try and book a flight just now, if you want to fly today or tomorrow, definitely prices are very high. But if you book a week later, not a month, but just a week later, prices are almost half. I mean, Delhi, Bombay, if you want to go today or tomorrow, would probably be around 10, 12,000 rupees. But if you're willing to wait and just a week, it's around 4,500 or something, which is what I saw yesterday, which is a fairly reasonable fare for Delhi, Bombay. Now, last minute tickets do tend to be more expensive across the board. But if you plan your travel, and normally, see, who does this high fare really hit the most? It hits the leisure travelers, those who are traveling on holidays and so on. Now, normally people who travel on holidays book in advance. It's the air travelers or those who are facing emergencies who book at the last minute. So, barring those facing emergencies, it's a small percentage, and it's unfortunate, but you can't do anything much about it. But as far as business travelers are concerned, if an airline can sell a ticket that would normally sell for 5,000 for 10, why wouldn't it do it? If the market can bear a price, why should an airline not charge it? Because look, we are naturally, and as a consumer, I also feel exactly the same way. But if one looks at it objectively, look, during the COVID period, all airlines made massive losses.
Okay.
And the government didn't bail out anyone. The government did extend a credit guarantee facility. But it was, at the end of the day, the airlines had to borrow money. They had the support of the government in terms of the guarantee. But they have to return that money. So you see, to sum up, the price surge post the two emergencies was immoral. That should not have happened. Second, we must recognize there is a supply shortage. 108 aircraft are grounded. And that creates a supply shortage, and that naturally will spike prices.
Okay.
And the third thing is, if you're willing to book in advance, and I'm not talking about 6 months. I mean, normally when people book international travel, they book months in advance. So even 6 months in advance. And when you look at, travel between India and the US, where a lot of people from the US travel to India during the winter holidays, people book almost a year in advance just so that they get low price tickets. So I think
that is understood, Mr. Mathur, and we agree with that. But the concern here being there's been a massive void, Krishna, and that is 300 flights less due to Go First suspending operation. That was inevitable, unavoidable, had to happen. They did not have enough operational money. Now, the ministry is saying we are hopeful that Go First will resume operations very, very soon, and that will fill up the void. But essentially, we have taken cognizance of high prices, and this is especially hurtful when it comes on the back of a Balasore accident, where people want to travel a fixed route, maybe, to understand whether their relatives or family members who were traveling in that train to ascertain their whereabouts, to go there immediately. And the last-minute traveler, they take a hit.
Right. We are even discussing this, and we're talking about travelers. See, I mean, it's laws of economics. When you have no other forms of transport, your ticket prices will go up. You can't let it say that like, oh, no, it's a tragedy, let's not have tickets. It doesn't work that way. But what will work is India having a full-fledged, thriving domestic airline industry, which is what India doesn't have, which is why even one small airline, which is not even the main player in the market, and one airline goes into voluntary insolvency proceedings and all those aircraft are off the air, then you have such a big problem. And then on top of that, you have a tragedy that happens, and it looks as if, everybody is suffering. But the fact of the matter is that India is still a fledgling when it comes to having an established domestic airline industry. In fact, India has the potential to be a global aviation hub. That's what the government believes, and that's the reason why you're seeing this announcement from the aviation minister with so many airports being opened in the last 9 years and so many more airports going to be opened, because India strategically is in a place where it can be an aviation hub. People can take connecting flights from here. There should be more international flights from India. And that's what, Air India is trying to do. The new Air India is taken over by the Tatas, where you have everything from, Air India to Indian Express to Vistara, all being merged into one airline. You see the CEO of Air India, what he says, Campbell Wilson. He says that for India to be a global aviation hub, there needs to be more international flights from India. Now, anybody who wants to fly out of India, you know this, Shweta, we always end up booking an international airline. It's a Lufthansa or a KLM or even a Finnair these days. You're not booking an Indian airline at all, not even one. So that's what needs to happen eventually. And for that to happen, India needs to fix something that's fundamentally rotten over here, and that is not having a stable and vibrant domestic airline industry. And for that to happen, there needs to be more investment. There needs to be more, people, trained people, skilled people, more aircraft being bought. I mean, thankfully, you have the Air India coming in, and hopefully that will build up competition within the industry. You have Air India, Tata's investing $70 billion. They're going to get about another 400 odd aircraft into their fleet. All of that, I'm hoping, will sort of bring more sanity to our ticket prices, our flight ticket prices, in the near future. You also have new entrants in the market like Akasa Air, which is coming now. So there are players coming in, but the fact of the matter is that, Shweta, you have this chronic problem that gets exacerbated with the tragedy like Balasore, once in a 2 decade kind of a tragedy, and that's fundamentally happens because India needs to have more planes, more airlines, and more airlines flying within India and outside of India.
And interestingly, you mentioned Akasa there, because the minister also mentioned Akasa, and in similar parlance as you did, he said while we talk about Go First and Jet Airways, we must not forget the success stories of regional and new domestic airlines like Akasa and small regional airlines. So essentially, Dhiraj, what minister here is saying is that you shouldn't be drawing your references from 1 or 2 failed stories. What you should also look at is a market that is increasingly getting more and more competitive, and some would say even consolidating, which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with Krishna, you know. The fact is, I mean, in all the positive and some level of drum beating also about fastest growing market, you know, potential hub, etc., etc. What we forget is all this. Did we forget one word, and that is potential. And to realize the potential takes time. It takes investment, and you know, it takes a number of things. You know, it's a number of things have to be in place. And here, the minister is right when he says that look, it's not just there are multiple dimensions on which growth and development needs to take place. The entire supply side environment scenario needs to be developed. You know, it's not just aircraft, it's not just airlines, it's also the aircraft, the airports, the airport infrastructure, the ground handling environment, all of that, the security at the airports, all of that needs to develop in tandem together so that the entire environment develops, and that's how we will mature as a civil aviation market.
Okay.
Of course, we need the big, glamorous, high volume metro airports. But more than that, we also need the low cost airports that will support a regional hub and spoke model. You know, I mean, you can't have the same level of charges at a metro and at a tier 2 town. And it's only when the tier 2 town get airports of their own, they start feeding into the metro line, to the metros and the major hubs, the major trunk routes. That's when the market will develop. That's when the market will grow. We have a huge unrealized potential. And when that potential gets realized, the demand would be so high that the airlines would all have higher load factors, they would have greater capacity deployed, their top lines would improve, and as scale improves, so would the bottom line. And there's just one other thing I want to say, you know, I forgot to mention it earlier when we were talking about the air prices, the air ticket prices. Now, if you want to travel Delhi, Bombay tomorrow by train, you won't get a ticket. Getting a ticket by train is very difficult. You know, you have a Tatkal scheme, which is a little more expensive than the normal. And remember, train tickets are heavily subsidized by cargo, by freight. So you don't have that cross-subsidy facility available in air travel. So we have to be realistic that in our expectations, and also patient in terms of our, again, in our expectations, because there are a lot of things that are happening, as the minister said. A lot of things have happened in the last decade or so, and it's still a work in progress, and it'll still take at least
and
5 years.
Another thing that is work in progress, and in particular, while there's good news on Go First, Mr. Mathur, we understand that Ministry is saying at this point that Go First will come back, and in fact will come back very, very soon. They have submitted a proposal. There are some queries that need to be answered. There is a larger problem here, and that is with respect to grounded fleet. Now, you know, data that is available out there suggests that literally 22% of the overall flights and the aircrafts that are operational in India are grounded at the moment. Now, somebody once said something very interesting on this very show, and they said that of aircraft has no purpose on ground. So the more time it spends on ground, the worse it is for the airline and for its own health. So essentially, a grounded fleet, it remains a major concern. Is that something that airline players can work around with, you know, with lessors and also with engine makers to get these engines repaired very, very quickly, to get them up and running? Because today it may be a problem with Go First, sir. Tomorrow it can be a problem with any other, you know, major airline.
Yeah, Shweta, as I said, there's a total of 108 aircraft in India that are grounded. We have a total of 700 registered aircraft. 108 of them are grounded. And as I said earlier, it is largely because of supply chain issues with the MROs and the engine manufacturers. Everyone who has Pratt & Whitney engines has aircraft that are grounded. And as you said, a grounded aircraft the net burden on an airline, because it has every aircraft has very high fixed costs. You have the crew, the leasing, the airport parking charges, and so on. Now those fixed costs are a drain, because if the aircraft isn't flying, there isn't a revenue to service them. So definitely, this is somewhere, maybe an area where the government could think about sort of, facilitating or a resolution. At the end of the day, look, these are contracts, commercial contracts between the airlines, and the lessors and the part suppliers. And beyond a point, the government can't really do much. But this is certainly an area of concern, particularly with Pratt and Whitney apparently saying that, refusing to honor their commitments to go first. So that certainly is a matter of concern now. That is in court. There's litigation going on. And like I said, these are contracts. So there's not much that the government can do. But perhaps it can use its good officers to try and find a resolution, help mediate a resolution, possibly in this situation.
Okay. Krishna, from what I see, the government, of course, trying to say that look at the success story, don't just look at the story of, the glitches on the way, and it's calling essentially, from my reading of it, a go first, a blip, not a reference point. This is not going to happen. History will not repeat. A Kingfisher perhaps will not repeat. And there is an emergency credit line that is now available to Go First. We'll have to see whether Go First avails that credit line. They need an upward of 200 crore rupees to start operating very, very quickly. With Jet, it's all the more interesting because lessors are now hoping to take Jet to court because they want their money back on the fleet that they have leased out to Jet Airways. So two major players there are currently battling it out, ensuring that one wanting to come back on air, the other hoping that it will sustain. So, overall, when you draw a picture of the Indian aviation space, you draw a picture of a space that is extremely, hoping to be robust, is extremely positive on what's to come and really kicking to get up, but falls down every time it gets up.
Yeah, the hope is that the way, Go First dealt with the situation by going for voluntary insolvency proceedings. Many say that that's the right way of going about it in a situation like that. Instead of allowing it to blow up completely out of proportion, you have a measured, in that sense that, sort of creating a playbook for the worst case scenario. Now, having dealt with the worst case scenario, now we're hoping for a comeback into the skies. The situation should normalize once Go First is back, and Jet also deals with all its problems with its creditors and is also able to put its fleet up in the air, and you have Akasa extending the fleet. Then you will see some normalcy happen for a brief period of time. Okay. And then what will happen is, my understanding is that the demand for air travel will only keep going up in this country. Domestic air travel, if long distance trains are going to be a problem for too many people, then they have to be given the flight option, and with the rise in the middle class, with the rise in income levels, you're going to see demand for air travel pick up, and that's the reason why you have an idea like Akasa Air making it to the skies eventually. It was backed by the legendary Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, the legendary Dalal Street investor. So he obviously saw the potential for civil aviation in the country. There is huge untapped potential, and that's the reason why you've got to stay optimistic in a market like India. The most populous country in the world, the most diverse country in the world. So much of...
look at the dichotomy of it. While India as a market is hugely underpenetrated, it is always also the fastest way of losing money to get into aviation sector.
There are a lot of ways of losing money in India. Make a movie, start a political party,
and start an
airline. These are like short ways of losing money for sure. But the fact of the matter is that that's what let me take you back in history a little bit. When the Marans from the Sun Group bought over SpiceJet, that was the time when they, I think, bought over SpiceJet for around 75 odd crore rupees. But at that point in time, they were making a movie that was worth 100 crore rupees, 150 crore rupees. But the fact of the matter is that something like civil aviation affects the lives of so many more people than one movie, and then the future generations as well, because this kind of mobility encourages people to take up jobs in places which are far away, and that's the kind of jobs that they want to do. You're going to see movement of labor, movement of people wanting to work in long distances, and we don't want to get into a situation where all of them are crammed into the trains. enough and more
Right.
have to be given the
Absolutely.
options to take to the air.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because we have always planned, and the hopes were that aviation or flying is not going to be an upmarket thing to do. A more aspirational Indian, a common middle class, lower middle class should be able to take to air. That of course was the grand plan. Now the prospects seem to be dwindling a little bit with the blip or the glitch with Go
No,
First.
the prospects don't dwindle, Shweta. That's the thing. What happened with the airlines and the economics of running an airline, people are learning lessons and they're improving with it. These, look at the way the Go First is handled. So the way these companies run will become better, and we'll have lesser instances of all these insolvencies and etc. happening. But as far as demand is concerned,
No, demand
No
is not
worries.
going away anytime soon at
Yeah.
all. But my concern is that with the prices going up,
Yeah.
it becomes very, very difficult for any aspirational Indian to pay up a 17,000 rupee for a flight to and from here, Delhi to Bombay, which
that's
is
how
too
fragile
much.
India's domestic airline
Absolutely.
ecosystem is.
Absolutely, it makes it very, very expensive. But we will, of course, keep coming back on that story. Mr. Mathur, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that story.
Thank
It
you.
is an important one. Civil aviation sectors, all the jitters, all the glam, all the glory will be tracked here on News 9.